And I was just so happy to be working in any way, But as a kid growing up, I loved animation. I loved cartoons, specifically Warner Brothers, Bugs Bunny, Looney Tunes cartoons, but I Flintstones, all that stuff. I just watched everything. But especially comedy and old movies as well. So when I started writing, I kind of fell into writing TV through performing, through sketch comedy, improv. I didn't set out like saying I'm going to be a TV writer. It just sort of became a goal once I realized that was a thing that people could do. So when my first job ever was on a live action show, a sketch comedy show, kind of like a knockoff of Saturday Night Live type show. But from that, I met a guy who got a job on a show on Nickelodeon called Real Monsters. And so they were looking for some freelance writers for episodes, and he suggested me and recommended me, and I got to do a couple episodes from that. And then I went on to becoming part of the staff of that show a little bit later. And so I was so happy to do it. And for the earlier part of my career, I would go back and forth between animated stuff and live action. I got some sitcoms, but did some shows for Disney. And then when the Simpsons job came along, then I was just all in on animation. And I love it.
At what stage of its development did you become involved with it?
Pretty close to the beginning. It all began with Bill Burr, of course, and his stand-up. And he had a meeting many years ago, almost 10 years ago now, with Peter Billingsley and Vince Vaughn, their production company. And they'd seen Bill, seen him do his comedy, and thought he was great. And they said, let's find what we can do with each other, And Bill over the years had various chances to do sitcoms and like adapt his act for sitcoms. And it never worked out for him. He didn't like it. It left kind of a bad taste in his mouth, because it felt like to him that what made him would have to be diluted, to be on a ABC sitcom or whatever. So he wasn't interested in that. But then he told them that he would love to do little short animations, kind of like the original Simpsons shorts on the Tracy Ullman show, and maybe for his website or something like that would sort of illustrate the stories that he would tell about how his father and what it was like from being a kid and being bullied and all that stuff. And they said, well, we're looking to develop an animated series. Would you want to think about that? And he got excited about that. And then he had no experience in, developing a series or writing for TV, or certainly for writing animation. So then they went out and sort of cast a net of let's find showrunners, people who have animation writing experience, to partner up with Bill. And I got a call from my agent saying, would you like to meet with this guy, Bill Burr, about this thing? And so I said, yes, absolutely. So we had a meeting, and then the first meeting was basically just sort of sharing stories about our respective childhoods and what it was like being a kid back then. And I told him the story about when I grew up in New Jersey during the summertime, and they made it into the show. We'd have this truck go by that was blowing out this mosquito pesticide. And for us kids, it was like the Pied Piper, we would run out of the house and follow behind. I didn't think it was really fun. And meanwhile, we're getting dosed with God knows what. So he remembered that as well. We laughed about that pretty hard. And we talked about our fathers and things like that. And then, so Bill felt like, okay, we meshed in that way. So then he said he wanted to work on the show with me. And then we ended up developing it together, over the period of time, where I would go off and write. I'd come up with a bunch of ideas, and then we talked about it. And he'd say, oh, I like this, I don't like this, whatever. So much of the original family was based on Bill and his dad and his family dynamic, and a fair part from mine too. But what I really brought to it was the character of the neighborhood. And I grew up on a cul-de-sac like the Murphys have, not exactly like that, but it was like a dead end street. And the neighbor, Vic, played by Sam Rockwell, is based on my best friend's dad, whose name was Vic, who wasn't like that at all, but he had a cool job. Like my dad had a uncool job. He worked for a construction company. And this guy worked for a record company in New York City, so I was like, oh man, and he knew people, so I idolized him in that odd way. So he became that guy. And all the weird neighbors are based on my weird neighbors and things like that.
So was it already set up with Netflix, or was not yet? So I guess then how, you guys came up with your concept, and how did you pitch it?
We pitched it a couple of places. We created a pitch, which is basically a way of telling what the story is, what the characters are, what the show is about. That was mostly like me with Bill ping-ponging off of me, like, you know, and Bill, whenever it came time for the character Frank to speak, Bill would do that, or, you know, Bill would tell his stories and I would say, oh, and here's what the show is going to be. It's going to be this and that. And we pitched it a number of places. And the original place that got interested in it was Adult Swim at Cartoon Network. We had a meeting with a very young guy who thought we were like, he felt like we might as well be like pitching like Star Wars, because he was like, no way, come on, no, like there was a mosquito truck, no, that didn't happen, you know. It's like, no, it really did, you know. So but he was really interested in it, he liked it, and so I got to write off and start writing a pilot script, which became the first episode pilot. And somewhere along the lines, they kind of decided, it was kind of a mutual decision that like they didn't want to do a half-hour show. You know, most of their shows are 15-minute, you know, blocks. Even Rick and Morty are like 2 15-minutes, and ours was a half hour. And for whatever reason, like it's sort of like they decided to come mutually, like, we're not going to do this at Cartoon Network anymore. And around that time, that's when Netflix was really just starting to gear up on doing originals. And Vince Vaughn was the one who said like, okay, it's fine, don't worry about it, we're gonna take this to Netflix. And I was kind of like, I didn't even know they did it, you know. It's like, to me, Netflix was the guys that sent you DVDs through the mail. I didn't have a streamer. I had no kind of streaming apparatus or anything at that time. This is back in like early 2013. But then we had a meeting there that Vince came to and Bill came to, with everybody there, Ted Sarandos and everybody, Cindy Holland at Netflix, and we pitched it in the room, and they really liked it. And it helped that Bill had already had a number of his specials that he had filmed for Comedy Central were already airing on Netflix and doing really well. So they knew that he had a following already built in. So that certainly helped us land a episode order.
Yeah, no, I worked in stand-up comedy for a long time in Chicago, and Bill, like well before he had really broken through, he was already a celebrity among comics. Just so well regarded in the world of comedy, and deservedly so. I was a listener to his Monday morning podcast, and when he could start to talk about it, he was almost beaming when he would like come home from the writers' rooms. But what was it like shepherding him from this world of writing alone just to give a monologue for an hour to now doing this collaborative process? Yeah. How did he take to that? How did you teach that?
He was great. He was great because at the beginning, we had a very small writer's room for that first season. It was me, it was Bill, it was our co-executive producer, David Richardson, and there was another great writer who I'd known worked with before named Tom Giannis, and a young woman named Emily Towers, this was her first job. And our writer's assistant was this amazing guy named Henry Gamble, who then since became a staff writer on the show. So it was only 4 or 5 of us. And Bill, even though he had huge establishment, you know, like you said, at stand-up, didn't know much about the process of writing scripts. So he just was like, he's like, I'm just one of the guys. I'm not, you know, he didn't pull rank in that way. You know, he's like, I'm not like, I'm the star, this is what goes. You know, he just sort of like, just treat me like one of the guys, you know. So when we're doing the room, I'm kind of running the room, and we're going through the script and say, okay, we need something different here, blah, 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 pitch. He would just pitch his stuff. And then he would always sort of like, that's sort of a trick that you do when you're a comedy writer anyway in a room. You kind of self-deprecate, you kind of say like, all right, this isn't it, but like you're always like sort of hedging your bets for when it bombs. But so he would pitch a lot of stuff, and then, you know, a lot of it was great, but that's how it works. Like, you know, it's like if you're hitting 400 or whatever, you're doing great, you know. So on the occasional ones where he wouldn't go, he would go like, I don't know, all right, I guess that sucks or whatever, like, you know, like that. So he was great. He was a really quick learner. He's super funny, of course, and he just knew the character so well because it was based on everything he knew growing up. So he was a joy, just a total joy to be in the room with.
Creating the visual aesthetic of the show, what the animation style is going to be like. I guess, where does that exactly come from, or maybe even specific to F is for Family?
Yeah, well, it came from, I mean, I'll say like we were all very closely working on it together. So it was myself, it was Bill, it was Peter Billingsley from Vince Vaughn's company, you know, from the beginning, Victoria Vaughn. But my feeling was that the show was going to be grounded in a reality, you know. I mean, even though it was animated, even though like some ridiculous stuff happened, it was really kind of like a grounded look at real life and what it was like. So we didn't want to be too crazy or too cartoony. Having come from The Simpsons, I didn't want it to look like another Simpsons, or another Family Guy. So I went back to a little bit of King of the Hill. I know people have said it looks like King of the Hill, which I'll give you that. But for me, it was more like I kept looking at like the shows from when I was a kid growing up in that time, like this Hanna-Barbera shows like Johnny Quest and the ones that the Hanna-Barbera shows that starred human beings, or even they had some that were crazy, like there was one called The Funky Phantom and all that kind of stuff, but like those kind of character designs of like those kind of 1970s shows. So it almost felt like, let's pretend like this show was made in the 1970s, so it's that kind of thing. So that was the beginning of our aesthetic, and it developed from there. Well, I'd also say this too, that like budget and things like that certainly played a part in it as well. We did all the animation on a program called Harmony, Toon Boom Harmony, which is sort of like and it took me a little while to sort of learn what that meant, but it's like all the main characters, they call them puppets. So they're drawn, of course, but they're digitally manipulated, but like they're already drawn. So if the character goes like this, you don't have to redraw 100 frames of them going like this. You can sort of digitally move the arm that way. So it's fairly limited style of animation, which also worked well with this stuff that we're doing, because I'm a big fan of, and we actually have what's part of the fun of the show too, is that we've had like things where they're watching cartoons on TV. So we had our version of like the Harlem Globetrotters, which is called the Watts World Travelers. And then you see that thing where they're running through a room and the same table goes by 100 times. I mean, everybody's done that joke. We're not the first one to do that joke, but it was fun to do that kind of limited animation style. But we were also doing a limited animation, largely for budgetary reasons, but we made it work with what we wanted to do.